The decisive end to the Klaus saga of Xenoblade Chronicles, Future Redeemed has been out for a few weeks, and after giving everyone some time to play through the game for themselves, I thought it's finally time to share my own thoughts about the final DLC wave of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Hey everyone, it's Yggdrasiel and welcome back to another Xenoblade Chronicles video. Today's video will be a bit of a two-parter. First, I want to give my regards to Future Redeemed, the final DLC for the Xenoblade Chronicles main story trilogy, but then we'll have a little bit of spoiler discussion, namely with regards as to what could be next for the series. I won't be diving into it as heavily as some others have just quite yet, perhaps a larger video for another day. This will just be my immediate thoughts and hopes. That said, if you don't want any potential for spoilers, I kindly ask you to click off of this video and come back at another time. But if you're sticking with me, well, thank you very much, and I hope you find in this video a nice bit of discussion to listen in on. But with all of that said, we're going to start off with my main verdict, so let's get stuck in. So then, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, to me, is easily the best standalone DLC/game within the series. Not in terms of the story, but in terms of gameplay design. Having one of the cleanest gameplay loops that I've seen within an RPG in quite a while. It's also ironically the one DLC that I wouldn't recommend playing if Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was your entry title within the series, as even more so than the base story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, there are just so many nods, references, and allusions to the story's motifs, quests, NPCs, musical scores, and of course zones of the past two mainline Xenoblade titles. The callbacks that Shulk and Rex have for so many different key characters, points, and themes are so staggering for the relatively tame time frame that the DLC offers. I've heard the term fan service shilling be used quite a few times, but I personally think that everything was fine and in good taste, especially when I take into consideration that as the ending installment of the mainline Xenoblade trilogy, we're likely never again getting more context to the characters and worlds that these games created. These callbacks were fitting and provided fans of the entries some extra moments to reminisce on, with a new bit of insight and some closure as well. And while Nintendo and Monolith Soft would like to argue that you don't need to play Xenoblade 1 or 2 to play through and enjoy 3, with all of the DLC included and especially with Future Redeemed, you would be doing yourself a genuine disservice to play through Future Redeemed without having given the past titles at least one shot at a playthrough. Future Redeemed also does an excellent job at touching upon many of the points that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 left out, particularly with characters like Riku, and also a surprising amount of extra lore for N of all people, as well as considering also the fact that Mobius did in fact always rule. There was this point, this tame point in time, where they actually couldn't do anything because, much like Professor Klaus locked out the people of his era, Ontos went on to do the same thing as his master did and locked out Mobius out of Origin, which to me is just absolutely hilarious, but it added quite a lot more context than I expected. It was all really just quite well done, well handled. I would, however, like to point out that while N fans truly rejoiced at all the new little bits of exposition and lore for such a tragic figure, Z enjoyers didn't quite get as much as they had hoped for, myself included. A little bit unfortunate, more brooding, although I did quite enjoy the fact that he's using N for multiple means, not simply just for N to obtain M and for himself to gain a new soldier in M, but also to challenge Alpha, as well as to reassert dominance over Origin, using the same key lore point in the attack and destruction of the city, giving quite a lot of new context. It's very well handled actually, and addressed a few things that I didn't even think about when we were discussing things that we missed within the base game of 3. A few questions still remain unanswered that I would have liked to have seen, such as more information about the medium of light, as well as still like how, say, Nia became the Queen of Agnes. And of course, people will always be talking about Mithra's Kid. I personally think that Nintendo or Monolith Soft will just drop, key artwork sometime months down the line for some sort of project, like an internal thing, you know? That's what I have to say on that. Anyway, let's discuss that gameplay loop and what a sheer joy it was to play and progress through this game. Now, I was quite worried, as well I'm sure as many of you all were, that when we were looking through the leaks of this game, community was shown to be a returning feature, that it would be a major focal point of the DLC like it was in Torn of the Golden Country, and thank God they instead chose to iterate on it and make it an entirely optional side feature. No, instead the main gimmick for this game is the affinity point system, and it is hands down the best system in any Xenoblade game. Pretty much anything done within Future Redeemed will offer a set amount of affinity points, from exploration, completing side quests, interacting with NPCs in the community system, logging items in the Collectopedia, and my personal favorite addition, defeating a set amount of enemies for the Enemypedia. It is such a simple, small feature, this one. You just take down a handful of the same enemy, you get affinity points, and you can see what items it drops. But more than that, it also passively encourages you to go out and take down a set number of these monsters, thereby also acquiring a steady number of materials, which then feeds back into other mechanics of the game. The gem grind, the weapon enhancements, upgrading the X-Reader, cooking ingredients, and more. Both of these then synergistically pair up beautifully with the exploration aspect of the game, incentivizing you to go around and look for every single nook and cranny of the Cent Omnia region. And every single affinity point that you acquire from doing all of this then just loops into character power progression, further allowing you to explore, take on more dangerous enemies, and see more of the dangers of the areas that the game has to present, and so on and so forth. I couldn't recall a single moment in the leveling process of this game where I felt that I was at some form of slump, save for the post-game super bosses, where it's quite clear to me now that they want you to take on the previous super boss a set number of times to be qualified and strong enough to take on the next one, but I just felt that the level disparities past 60 are a bit too egregious for some too many players. The side quests and affinity scenes were all very well handled. I don't think I particularly disliked any of them, and it further solidified just how much I truly enjoyed the side quests, NPCs, and world building of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 as a whole. In fact, the world building of Xenoblade has never felt stronger, and in Future Redeemed, we not only set up more of the world of the base game of 3, but also again further iterations on some themes and NPCs for the past titles as well. From more obvious nods like the children characters of the main casts of the past titles, to NPC nods like Gemman's Legacy and my personal favorite, Giorgio's Curry? Working hard as ever, I see, Georgie. Is Georgie holding up the canteen because the canteen in Colony 9 was held up by Giorgio? Because I would be so happy for that. Need a really particular ingredient to bring out the flavor, and we got none of them. It's dance apples. Woo! I've never been so happy for a small side quest detail. My god, I joked about Giorgio when I first stepped foot into the center plaza, and they took such a simple side character that just wanted a couple of dance apples for his curry stand, and now we suddenly have definitive curry lore within the series? You know, that it's Giorgio's recipe that Matthew falls in love with, so much to the point where generations down the line, Monica's specialty dish in a side quest is dubbed Mana Curry. It's both bizarre, but also a bit endearing, I have to say. Now, another key point that impressed me also is that while our group is partly focused on Mobius as they seek to confront Alpha, that Kevis and Agnes aren't simply excluded from just beyond the deal with Glimmer and Nicole. In fact, there are affinity scenes and NPCs directly talking about the current state of the war, namely how the Cadencia region at this point in time is the most hotly contested territory. There's even nods to the lore in the combat and exploration of the game, with small camps and exploration groups that pop up every now and then after certain story checkpoints. I actually had a mini heart attack at one point just trying to go back to one of the past campsites I'd visited, and it was overrun with an Agnian platoon that I was clearly meant to take out a lot earlier on in the game, but oops. It's all just lovely extra little details like this that the lore nerd within me loves to see. All of this to say that Future Redeemed hit just about every mark that I was hoping it would be. It's obviously way too early to say this into the year, but it's crazy to see that a DLC for a game ends up potentially being my game of the year already. I have to be honest with you. Of course, that might change with Tears of the Kingdom being out in just a day as of this video releasing, but I honestly have to say this is top 5 material right here for me. It's quite a fitting and strong way to end such a saga that has touched on my life for over a decade, and I hope for many of you it did the same as well. So then, the final pages of the saga have turned, and like many of you all, I wonder where we're going next. What journey will we embark upon next in the years to come? Monolith Soft has already gone on record to say that Xenoblade as a series is continuing, but with Future Redeemed, there is a defined checkpoint. What happens beyond here is anyone's guess. Will we get something entirely new? Will a certain radio at the end of the game have hinted to us a return to Xenosaga, or perhaps minor retcons to allow for the inclusion of Xenoblade Chronicles X? Will we still have Thick Cat Girl? The point is that while we don't know, we were given some very strong hints in those last few moments of the story, along with a strong visual that we are truly leaving behind the legacies that Shulk, Rex, and everyone else carved together. The specific name drop of Dmitry Yuriev from Xenosaga is particularly striking and hints to some that a Xenosaga remaster or even a retelling might be in our future. Then there's the term Philadelphia-class ship, from my understanding as Xenogears reference. And meanwhile, the key theme and interest in space-age exploration involving the transport of millions of civilians at once just rings true of Xenoblade Chronicles X. What's more, this cutscene alludes to the main setup of Xenoblade Chronicles X, also known as Exodus Day, which took place in July of 2054 of that game, with a nod from our good friend the radio that a Philadelphia-class ship will be departing on its maiden voyage also in July. And I know while many people are yearning for Xenosaga to be the path forward, and this is also likely in the face of my own ignorance, as I've just barely begun to play Xenosaga for myself, other words at play like Earth-Life Colonization Project and Coalition Government just scream of Xenoblade Chronicles X to me. The Xenosaga side of things definitely have their own points of focus, obviously with Dmitry Yuriev, and perhaps at least in my own opinion that the Saviorites are perhaps a precursory thought or nod to the Realians of Xenosaga, but if not for the shining blue light at the end screen of the game, I'd feel much more confident in my own hopes for another Xenoblade Chronicles X title. Maybe if instead of dropping Dmitry Yuriev as a name, they instead said the name Mira Torres, a central figure to the setup and lore of Xenoblade Chronicles X, to the point that planet Mira is named in her honor. Well, if that was the case, I would feel much more solidified in my hopes and thoughts for the next title. And of course, there is that one additional thought aching in the back of my head, is perhaps a red herring, but given its purposeful and extensive inclusion in the ending cutscenes of the game, to the point where it competes for our attention with Future Redeemed's closing exposition, I find that a bit unlikely. I guess if I had to make a conclusive statement for right now on the matter, I personally hope for a continuation of Xenoblade Chronicles X, perhaps with some minor retconning to allow for Exodus Day and Klaus's experiment to occur within the same time frame. But I do overall think a return to or retelling of Xenosaga is a bit more likely to occur given what we have so far. Overall though, what a wondrous journey Future Redeemed was, even more so having shared it with all of you here on YouTube, so I thank you all greatly, either if you joined me for my playthrough or if you've been checking out my regular Xenoblade content discussions and analysis. But that is where we're going to be ending this video. I'm not quite sure what I'll be doing next with the conclusion of the Klaus saga having been covered, and coverage for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is surely winding down, so it may just be time to cover my thoughts on some of the past titles, maybe even a lore timeline video will be in order when the time permits. Till then, I thank you all very much for taking the time to watch this video, and please consider leaving a like if you enjoyed it and letting me know what your impressions of Future Redeemed are down below. With all that said, again, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and as always, have a great day.